because God forbid those preventative measures work. And people look around and say, well, I don't really need this jab. I'm as David would say, I'm healthy, I'm eating better, I'm getting plenty of sun, I'm taking these preventative measures which don't, require a prescription or for me to have to go to a hospital, et cetera, et cetera. So in today's main part of the episode, we're talking about, it's a two-parter, not really a two-parter. They feed into each other. Fauci, I don't know if you heard about this, David. He got $5 million richer throughout the pandemic. Did you hear about this?
Fucking way.
$5 million.
Wow.
I guess that was just
that's just for doing a good job.
Yeah.
Doing a good job. Well, you should have given him more.
Now, this is according to openthebooks.com, which is it is a watchdog organization that looks at the books of all the way from government agencies down to individual government actors, operators, bureaucrats, et cetera. And basically holds them accountable, right? The government is supposed to be accountable to the people. Well, Open the Books does that. And they analyzed Fauci's net worth. So we're not saying that the United States government paid him a $5 million bonus because of his performance during COVID. And we're not saying that Pfizer and Moderna literally wrote him a check for $5 million. But we're saying that his assets, from his stock holdings to everything else that goes into somebody's net worth, expanded by $5 million throughout COVID. Now, I know that Fauci is, in the entire American bureaucracy, the highest paid employee. I don't know exactly what he makes a year, but I venture to say that it's not $2.5 million. So for his wealth to expand by $5 million over that period of time, I mean...
Did he start a Kickstarter?
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I think that a lot of the Fauci cultists probably would have given him money via Kickstarter.
I mean, if he had just named himself Anthony the Science Fauci and just started a Kickstarter, probably COVID would have probably only lasted 1.5 years instead of the whole 2.
So with that being said, you would think that maybe not so soon. Now, again, I don't remember if it was this year or next year, but Fauci is stepping down from his position. The heat got turned up a little bit too hot. He doesn't want to stick around for it. So he's like, peace out, had a good run.
He's not defending the belt.
Bacon grease and hair grease, I'm out. Is that you would think that maybe he wouldn't want to, start throwing money back to EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak again, considering that, all of the dust hasn't settled and we don't exactly know conclusively how much involvement him and that organization had in the whole COVID fiasco. David and I have our suspicions. A lot of other people do too. Fauci obviously won't admit to it, but suffice it to say that you listen to episode 47 and what was contained in Fauci's emails, you'll have some questions too. So you would think Fauci would want to distance himself from that individual in that group as much as possible. But again, like we said, he's stepping down, so maybe he's like, fuck it, I don't care. What are you going to do to me? Throw me in jail? I'm a part of the establishment. They don't ever come after people like me. And the other thing you're probably thinking is, well, guys, listen, I'm a pretty astute listener and viewer of WMD Podcast, and I know that NIH gets about $45 billion a year in funding.
And I'm about to fuck up this Thanksgiving dinner.
So $3 million compared to $45 billion is a pittance. Like, how much did he really give EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak? And the first thing that we'll say to that is, you have to look at the fact that not only did that group get money again in light of its involvement in COVID, potentially, but you have to look at what NIH chose not to fund with its $45 billion. In fact, by some data estimates or whatever, only 2% of total NIH funding throughout all of COVID went to things like, I don't know, does it transmit on surfaces? How far do you have to be away from somebody to actually, not catch it?
Is vitamin D deficiency correlated?
Are cloth face masks, the best thing since sliced bread, or as they, CDC director Walensky later said, they're nothing more than a face decoration? Is doggy style
the only way you can have sex with your wife or girlfriend?
If your dying grandparents want to see the grandkids one last time, should they hug them through a plastic sheet, or will that really not do anything? What about this really big thing we keep hearing about called natural immunity, which for millennia, virology has understood to be pretty important, but apparently
Fauci understood it
apparently COVID, it didn't exist anymore.
a couple of years ago.
NIH spent 2% of its funding on those types of studies. So it's not just that they chose to fund EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak again, but it's also what they chose not to study. They chose not to study, another big category is mitigation measures. Remember Dr. McCullough, who was shouting from the rooftops all throughout the beginning of COVID, saying, here are the things, the clinical practice things we need to do to make sure that the virus doesn't progress to a level that it could be life-threatening. People like that were shut down and studies like that weren't performed with NIH funding. I wonder why. Why was it that Fauci chose not to fund studies that could make the virus, at least the impact of it, more manageable, but chose to fund studies that, come from EcoHealth Alliance or that, back up the already accepted narrative that the vaccine was the one and only way to go out of the COVID pandemic?
Well, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, David, this was an exceptional time. Like, they had never seen this unprecedented thing happen before, and they were just trying to make quick decisions in the best direction that they could see based on the data that they were given. But what's it called again? The NIH stands for the National Institute of Health. And they're supposed to measure the health of our country, right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. They also work in tandem with the World Health Organization.
The name implies that their main priority numero uno is this nation, seeing as it's, funded.
I don't think that's an unfair characterization.
No,
yes,
fair.
Go ahead.
So where were they during the opium epidemic?
Funding studies for pharmaceutical companies to pump out opioid-laden drugs.
The thing that was killing thousands and thousands of Americans a year, which, not unlike COVID, was detrimental to our society. Where were they then? One wonders, because I had never heard of the NIH, because I'm a dumb American, before coronavirus happened, but then all I heard was CDC, NIH, CDC, NIH, CDC, NIH. You shouldn't get into a car, says the NIH. You can't fly a plane, says the CDC. You have to put a mask on your dick, says the NIH. Like, what the fuck are we... Like, if you're invested in health, why didn't you study, vitamin D, like all the things you mentioned? It seemed as though they were looking in a general direction that wasn't necessarily predicated on our health. Because I don't think that... and again, I'll say it with the government, I'll say it with everything else, they don't care about your health. If they cared about your health, you wouldn't be able to dump Coca-Cola down your throat at the rate that you do.
Not that we're saying the government should step in and take the Coca-Cola out of your hand.
Well,
you're an adult. You can make your own decisions.
Go ahead. But how many commercials did you see while you were locked at home for Burger King, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A?
And thank God they had Postmates to be able to bring it to your house.
Thank Christ. What was the national average of people that stayed at home during...
I think it was 20 or 30 pounds people gained.
Yeah.
They gained a lot of weight.
And now that we know more because of the science and statistics...
thanks to NIH funding, by the way.
No, we just found it out. The thing that we were saying the entire time, you and I, and then most of the population was saying, if you're fat and out of shape and unhealthy, this thing's going to fuck you up.
Or to sterilize that for David.
Don't sterilize it. I want to be able to impregnate people. Don't you sterilize me. Don't you chemically castrate me.
Because adipose tissue increases the cytokine storm, which makes the virus replicate faster and reach a threshold that puts it into the life-threatening category.
Don't say science at me. You're not Fauci. You're not the science.
No, I'm just regurgitating what I heard from Dr. McCullough.
All I'm saying is that when you're unhealthy, anything will fuck you up. When you have AIDS doesn't kill you. The common cold kills you because it suppresses your immune system. Like that, all you have to do is, hey, guys, we don't know what we're fucking with right now. drink a lot of water, get some sunlight, do some push-ups, don't eat a lot of shitty food. That's all they had to say.
While we fund a whole bunch of research onto, preventative measures, as Dr. McCullough was saying, most of his focus at the beginning and middle of COVID was we need to find out what are the clinical steps, what are the preventative measures we need to tell people to do. And again, the classic one that David and I talk about, that he talked about a lot, is when you went out. Now, be honest with yourselves. How many people heard this? The first time I heard it was from him probably a year and a half into the pandemic. But again, he wasn't paraded all around the media like Fauci, but this would have been very important information. He said that one of the most important things, early interventions you could do is, let's say you went to a concert or a club or whatever, and you were around a bunch of people, and you didn't know who in the crowd, if anybody, had anything. The best thing you could do is go home that night, get a, whatever it's called, like a neti pot or whatever, and flush out your sinuses. Because before the virus actually gets to your lungs and gets to the areas of your body where it can replicate and become very problematic if you don't treat it, is you flush out your sinuses, you clear those viral particles from your system in the beginning. Now, does that guarantee that you're never going to get sick again? No, but it decreases the viral load to a level that maybe your body might be able to fight it off before it puts you on a ventilator. Now, that's a very simple thing that everybody could have been doing from day one. Yet people like Peter McCullough were having their medical license threatened for telling people this. And again, what's the worst thing that could happen if he's wrong? If he's wrong,
some people got some really clean sinuses.
They got some really clean sinuses.
Fuck.
And they got COVID anyway. Because don't try to come at me and say, oh yeah, well, if you let him tell people that, they're just going to say, well, I guess I'll be safe from everything as long as I flush my sinuses. So I'm not going to take any precautions. Really? You think that's what everybody would have done?
I can't even get my girlfriend pregnant. I flushed my sinuses.
When everybody all over, every mainstream media source was saying mask up, 6 feet, yada, 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 when they were screaming at you to take 18,000 different precautionary measures, which a lot of people did, especially early on when we were trying to figure out what we were dealing with, if they could have added one extra thing into their regimen, it might have helped a lot of people and saved a lot of lives, yet you didn't hear this from anybody until McCullough went on Joe Rogan. And thank God that he had the platform that he did for enough people to hear that and to say, wait a minute, it doesn't seem like our national health officials actually had our health at front of mind. It seems like they had money at front of mind because they pushed everything in the direction of the only way out of this situation is a jab in your arm. You can't take any preventative measures before we get to that point, because God forbid those preventative measures work and people look around and say, well, I don't really need this jab. I'm as David would say, I'm healthy, I'm eating better, I'm getting plenty of sun, I'm taking these preventative measures which don't require a prescription or for me to have to go to a hospital, et cetera, et cetera. They were all pushing away from that direction, and they were pushing in the direction that, well, lo and behold, made Dr. Fauci $5 million richer over the last 2 years.
But it's a good thing the Nordstream pipeline blew itself up.
Yeah. I know it seems like the record is stuck on the track of incentives. People will act according to the incentives that are placed in front of them. And that to any extent that we want to change things on a macro level about the way those that rule us, because again, I'm not so naive and completely, naive is where I'll leave it. I'm not so naive as to believe that my perfect world of a stateless society is going to happen anytime soon. I know that. I know that I am on, as they would say about Meloni. In that position, I'm actually on the fringe in terms of people who actually want that to happen. So, what can I do? What can you do? What can we all do to have better outcomes from the people that rule over us?
Join Weapons of Meme Destruction every weekend.
Definitely that. That is step number one.
Heartless plug.
Step number 2 is sharing with your friends and family. But is
step number 3.
Institute accountability. And in many respects, that means eliminating these positions which are completely closed off from accountability. Fauci's position Up until him being put under the microscope of COVID, his position was essentially insulated from accountability because nobody elected him. And then administrations just came and go and just leave him at his post doing his thing for decades. So you have to first change the structure of accountability and make people at every level of government, every single person that has any impact on your life to the most minute degree in terms of the state needs to be accountable. And the second thing is you have to change the incentive structure. You have to make it so that people acting in their own self-interest is actually also in the interests of everybody else. And when you have a system that is set up on force, fraud, and coercion, that is what the state is, it is funded coercively, it acts fraudulently, corruptly, it has its buddies, all of that kind of stuff. All of those incentives make people that sit in the positions of power in government acting in their own self-interest work directly against you. You switch that around. You voluntarize it as much as you possibly can and make sure that if they want that office, they want to call the shots, they want to do X, Y, or Z, that to act in their own self-interest, to keep that position, to keep the money flowing in, et cetera, they need to do what is in the best interest of you. And to any extent that they're not doing it, change the incentive structure. I think that means a stateless society. People say that's crazy. Maybe that's utopian. Maybe it is. But to any extent that we could take one tiny little step in that direction of changing the incentive structure, we're changing the world and making it better for those that are coming behind us. To use that old adage, we are planting trees under whose shade we know we will never sit. We got to make those changes now. We got to make those changes yesterday. And hopefully we'll have a better world to hand off to our kids.
Long story short, every amount of change that Dane just said takes one power coin out of their pocket and puts it into your pocket eventually, or your children's pocket, or your children's pocket. It's important to start moving now, because if they've got all the coins, kind of like Russia, you don't have any bargaining chips. So we need to start moving forward.